One of the questions we hear most often from people just getting started with composting is, can composting attract rodents and other animals into my yard? The bad news is the answer is yes, sometimes it can. Whether you're in the city, the suburbs, or out in the country, rodents might come visit your compost pile. But there's also good news because there's some very simple steps you can take to discourage or even prevent rodents from getting into your compost pile. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I've got 5 tips to help you make sure that your compost bin is not attracting rodents. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with GardensThatMatter.com, where we believe your garden is the key to better food, a better life, and a better planet. Now, we all know that rodents, particularly rats and mice, can be pesky, persistent little creatures. They multiply at alarming rates, they sometimes carry disease, and they can be pretty destructive with all that chewing and pooping. We don't really want to encourage them. On the other hand, they are really important in our ecosystem. They are a key part of the food web. They feed lots of other animals. They move seeds around, they cycle nutrients. Rats and mice are super adaptable. They can eat just about anything. They're omnivores, and they can find shelter in lots of different places. So if your compost pile is not managed well, it could become shelter for mice and rats. It could provide food for them. And so in this video, we're going to talk about how not to do that. Number 1, put your bins in open ground. Rats and mice, other rodents, tend to be prey animals, and so they have certain behaviors we can use to our advantage. They like to stay close to edges, and they like to stay under cover. So if you see a mouse outside, you'll notice it staying on the edge of a ditch or a building, often staying under cover of leaves. If we put our compost bins away from buildings at least 5 feet, maybe even further, and if we make sure the ground around them is pretty clear, you can rake up the debris, move any brush away, that's going to help us because it's going to make it riskier for the mice and rats to come. If you have a stockpile of brown materials like leaves or other garden waste that you're going to use as your cover material, you could keep that in a second bin or in a covered garbage can or something like that to make sure that it's not a place that can be sheltering those rodents. Since rodents are usually playing it pretty safe, that open ground is going to help us make it less likely that they'll take the risk of getting picked off by a hawk or an owl or some other predator. Number 2, tend your pile and make hot compost. Keep in mind that rodents are looking for food and shelter. An untended compost pile is probably going to be dry, full of insulative material, warm and cozy. Maybe there's some snacks inside, everything your little mouse family could desire. So we don't want that. We're going to have a hot compost pile, active compost pile. You want to start with plenty of nitrogen-rich green materials. These are things like grass clippings, kitchen scraps, manure. Coffee grounds would also have a lot of nitrogen. Those are going to help our pile heat up. We're going to keep it moist, and we also want to turn it occasionally to get those materials mixed up. That's going to help us have an active hot pile. In addition to making kind of uncomfortable conditions for a mouse or a rat who might be thinking of moving in, hot compost also means that food waste is breaking down faster, so it's not tempting creatures to come digging and looking for food. Number 3, we're going to bury food scraps in the center of the compost pile. What you want to do when you bring fresh food scraps, even to a hot pile, is you're going to dig down into the pile. You're going to kind of make sure that it's in the center so that the edges and the cover material, you're going to cover it with 4 to 6 inches of brown material like leaves or dried grass clippings. That's going to be kind of like a filter for any smells that food might put off, and it's going to make sure that that material starts composting right away. Now, if we're composting something that's a little more attractive to rodents or other animals, like maybe some leftover chicken bones from making chicken stock or some dairy, because we do put those into our hot compost pile here at our house. If I'm putting those things in, I usually will put a scoop of finished compost or a scoop of soil in there. Make sure there's lots of good microbes to break down that material and also act as another layer in that kind of biofilter that our compost pile has become. Burying those food scraps at the center of our pile is going to help us make sure that they're not there as a buffet for any passing rodents. Number 4, block their access. If you don't want to take any chances with rodents in your compost pile, you can choose a compost bin that's going to block their access. Something like a plastic tumbler or a plastic bin would be out of reach for rodents. Now the plastic bin, they could potentially go underneath and come up from underground. And so for that one, we want to think about using something on the ground that the mouse or the rat or other animals can't get through. Hardware cloth is a good choice for this. This is wire mesh. It comes in different sizes, but we want to look for 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch mesh. That's going to be small enough to keep out most critters. And that hardware cloth, you could line the bottom of your plastic bin. You could use it to line a pallet bin or a wood bin, and just really make sure that nothing in that rodent group can get in. Now, a few tips. If you're using hardware cloth, do be cautious about the edges. You want to make sure they're not poking out, gonna snag anybody. They can be sharp. And it is a little bit more expensive. That's one of the reasons we use welded wire fencing for our bins, because it's inexpensive. We can get a whole roll for inexpensively. But if you're really worried about mice and rats, this hardware cloth will be helpful. They can't chew through it, so you can build a bin that is rodent proof in that way. Well, hardware cloth does have the advantage of air being able to move through, and smaller animals, bacteria, fungi, bugs, worms, the things we do want in our compost pile. So that's another advantage of using hardware cloth. But that will block physical access, just like a hard plastic bin will block access for rodents and keep them out of your compost. Number 5, avoid composting foods that attract rodents. I think of this one as kind of the last effort. But if you live in a place that has rodent problems, if you're really worried about rodents, then you can go this route. You can avoid composting the foods that are interesting to them. Cooked foods, breads, pastas, meat, dairy, oil. These are things that are gonna give off smells that attract those rodents. They're good foods for them. So you can just not put those into your compost pile. You can keep your compost pile for veggie scraps and coffee grounds and garden waste, right? Yard waste. That's totally fine. But you probably don't want to throw that good organic waste into the trash can. So where are you going to put it? Well, we have a few options. You could try something like trench composting, where you dig a trench or a hole and you bury the food waste there. Sometimes people will do that in a garden or in a future garden area. You can also use worm composting, vermicomposting. Worms can process most foods, not the meat and the dairy, but lots of other foods can go into a worm bin and become really great, nutrient-rich worm castings that you can use in houseplants and in your garden and in your potting mix. It's great material, so worms are fantastic. Another idea is to use bokashi. Bokashi is a fermentation process. You have a bucket and some bran that's been inoculated with a bacteria that works anaerobically to break down meats and oils and all kinds of food. You can put almost anything into a bokashi bucket safely, and it will ferment there. And then after it's fermented, it's safe to go into your outside compost bin. So that's another option to look at. Now, there is some startup cost with bokashi and worms, depending on how much DIY you do, that come in kits. It's super easy to get a kit if you wanted to try starting that way. You could even start small with a little bit of a kit and do part of your waste and then grow from there. So that is our 5 tips for keeping rodents out of your compost bin. You're going to start with open ground, a nice hot compost pile. You're going to have an active managed compost pile. You're going to be burying that food waste in the center. Now, if you'd like some help with hot composting, our Quick Start to Composting series will definitely get you there, and we'll include links with this video. From there, if you really want to make sure you've got rodent-proof bins, you can block physical access, or you can avoid putting rodent-attractive food in the bin at all. If you'd like some ideas about more composting methods and try to find the one that's just right for you, we also have an infographic with more than a dozen different ways to compost, and it'll walk you through deciding what's going to be a good fit for you and your family. So come on over to gardensthatmatter.com. We will leave a link so that you can find that infographic. We would love to see you there. You can sign up to get emails, you can join a class, you can check out the blog and other videos there. And before you leave YouTube, definitely give me a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think. What other questions do you have about composting or gardening? I would love to hear from you in the comments. Subscribe so you can get our future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and until I see you again, happy gardening!